Hi, and welcome back. So far in this module, lesson 1 of module 4, you should have been reading about the explosion of the volume of data. In fact, not just the volume, the variety, the velocity. And so we've been talking about the fact that as the data explodes, its value is going up. In fact, that's why Mark and I chose to make the banner at the top of this one gold. It's kind of as this Clive Humby quote suggests, data is the new oil. Mark and I thought, well, data is the new gold. So the value of data is going up. And as the value of data goes up, it magnifies all of the vulnerabilities. And I also like this quote from Tim Berners-Lee: data is precious and will last longer than the systems themselves. And I thought that it was important to put that up here so that we don't think of data in isolation. That's a definite theme throughout this module. So you've seen this image before. You might not have seen it since the beginning of class. This is out of the CSEC supplement, right? That ACM curricular guideline that talks about what should be in a cybersecurity program of study. And then what our supplement did is specify what should go into Cyber 1, Cyber 2, a foundations course, regardless of whether it's taught in college or in high school. And in CSEC, we have these 6 knowledge areas: data security, network security, system security, software security, organizational security, and societal security. And in this course so far, we've talked a lot about system security. Through module 0 and then through the course, we've talked about network security. Through module 1, coming back at it in module 3, software security. And coming up in 5, you're going to dive into organizational and societal security. So in CSEC, these knowledge areas are treated as entities, right? But that's for the purpose of CSEC. Sorry about that. I really want you to think about it a little bit differently. So I would like you, right now here in Module 4, we're bringing data security into focus. But I don't want you to think about data security without remembering what you've already learned about system security, right? There's a relationship. If the system is compromised, the data are exposed. So you can put all of the protections on data that you want on the data itself, but if the system is exposed, it's possible that they can get around, over, under that fence. I also want you to think about network security, data in transit. So the system might have the data securely stored, but the data are going over the wire. If the network isn't secured, then the data in transit might be at risk. And I also want you to think about data and its relationship to software. In order to use data, you're probably going to be processing it somehow. So if software has vulnerabilities, then maybe that's the way that the data are compromised. So all the time when you're thinking about how to secure data, you have to think about the system, the network, the software. Likewise, whenever you're trying to think about securing the system, you have to think about securing the data. When you want to think about securing the network, you have to think about, are the data secure, right? So these are all two-way streets or multiple two-way streets. And so we want to be mindful of that in our thinking all the time. So this is data security. And I've put a subtitle in here, Thinking Before or Beyond Encryption. And I said thinking before because the majority of this module is about cryptography. Lessons 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are all about cryptography. But we're going to take a few minutes before we dive deep into cryptography. We're going to take a few minutes to talk about other things that you can do to secure data. So in that regard, you're thinking about these things before you learn about cryptography, but maybe in practice, it's thinking about things beyond encryption, not just cryptography alone. So we devote 5 modules here to cryptography because it's an important topic, it's a deep topic, and it is necessary, but it's not sufficient. As Bruce Schneier has pointed out, cryptography can be bypassed, and that's why all of those things that I was talking about on the last slide with regard to system security, software security, network security, why those controls are so important. Encryption is highly valued for confidentiality, and part of it, as you will learn, for integrity of data. But encryption does nothing to control how much data you collect, how long you keep it, how widely it's shared, or what happens when controls fail. And so we should always recognize that modern data security needs to go beyond encrypt and trust. It has to assume that breaches will happen, insiders will misuse their access, and that we need a more strategic approach. And that's what is the focus here of what we're talking about. And I like this last Bruce Schneier quote. Bruce Schneier wrote a really good book. I read it several years ago called Secrets and Lies. That helped me understand cybersecurity a lot. So if that's of interest to you, that's a tip. All right, so we're going to keep thinking this way. We're going to keep thinking about data in its context of systems and networks and software, because we want to always practice systems thinking. We want to think about systems of systems. We want to think about interaction effects. All right, this is the principle of data minimization. Here's a definition. Organizations should collect, process, store, and share only the minimum amount of personal or sensitive data necessary to fulfill a specific legitimate purpose. This definition actually is from GDPR, and I think you probably know, we've alluded to it earlier in this class. GDPR is a European Union regulation. It's not a US regulation. So you see a heavier emphasis in the EU on the principle of data minimization, but it doesn't mean it isn't a best practice and shouldn't be used here in the United States. So let's just look at a couple of the examples. I won't read them all. Instead of storing a user's full birth date, a service that only needs age verification could simply store over 18, yes or no, right? That's minimizing the amount of data you have to collect and minimizing the type of data you collect so that it's less sensitive. Same kind of thing. Instead of collecting full GPS coordinates, an app could only collect city or zip code. So I'll give you a few minutes to read through the others, just so that you have kind of a broad and inclusive view of the kinds of data that could be minimized. So the principle of data minimization attempts to reduce the potential attack surface, to promote efficiency, to reduce the number of controls needed, and therefore maybe the expense of cybersecurity, to mitigate impact, and to protect privacy risks. And over on the right-hand side, I've got this framework that we've used throughout this course. So as we've told you before, usually a principle can be implemented through a variety of methods and a variety of tools. It's not a one-to-one relationship. And so let's look at some of the methods that we use to minimize data. Oh, I forgot I put this in here. Minimization doesn't mean giving up functionality. It means designing with restraint. I like that notion. I think you all know I used to be a professor at Purdue University. And when I would advise my PhD students as they were getting ready to collect data for their dissertation, it was a common occurrence that the PhD student would want to collect about 2 to 3 times more data than they actually needed to answer their research questions. And I understood why it was happening. They were thinking, well, I just don't know. I might need it. And even if they weren't thinking that, they were thinking, well, I can, so why not collect it? But I would tell them over and over and over again, if you don't need it, don't collect it. So designing with restraint, designing your research study with restraint, designing your system that stores, processes, and uses data with restraint. Get what you need, no more. Okay, so now to some of these methods. This first one is the concept of minimizing the surface. And you see on the right-hand side, you see the picture of the armadillo rolling up into a ball. And I included that here. You can find other examples in the animal kingdom, like a turtle, right? So it has that hard shell, and if it starts to feel vulnerable, it pulls its head in, but it also pulls in its other soft tissue. It can pull in its legs, it can pull in its tail to minimize the surface and the weaker surface. And of course, that's exactly what this armadillo is doing as well. So hopefully those are 2 analogies that help you remember, minimize the surface. We already had this example, verifying age without storing full birth date. The example on the last slide was over 18, yes or no. Could be just the year, but anyways, always thinking of how to get the information you need, but no more. So when you do this, you can lower your risk. The less data you have available, the less chance of misuse. You can save money, perhaps by needing to comply with fewer regulations, perhaps by reducing the complexity of your controls, your security measures. And then if the breach does occur, hopefully you are minimizing the damage that can be caused. right? So it ripples throughout. That concept of minimizing the surface ripples throughout the prevent, detect, respond, recover cybersecurity framework. Minimize the time. So I found two more examples from the animal kingdom. The first one in the upper right, that's a brown bat. And in the lower right is what's called a trapdoor spider. So brown bats only fly at night in order to minimize the time that they are exposed, and they purposefully fly at night because there are fewer predators. So the same concept with the trapdoor spider. So we want to remember the longer that data remains accessible, the more chances an attacker has, right? So again, we have a system. You know, if you could automatically delete logs after 30 days instead of keeping them indefinitely, you are minimizing the chance that those old records could be compromised. So you're reducing risk, right? You are providing for, hopefully, simpler controls. You are providing, hopefully, for cost savings. And same kind of thing, if the incident does happen, faster incident response and recovery. So far we've got minimize the surface, minimize the time. Minimize the complexity. I couldn't find a good analogy from the animal kingdom. We talked about the amount of data. We talked about the velocity of data. We've talked so much in this class about systems of systems. So complex data structures, multiple databases, multiple APIs, multiple access points. Each one becomes an attack vector. The greater the number of vectors, the greater the attack surface, right? So you're always looking to simplify. Simplified structures make all of your controls and monitoring more efficient, more effective. It reduces the likelihood of human error. It reduces the likelihood of misconfigurations, right? Supports faster detection. Sorry about that. Supports faster detection and response, right? This is an interesting one, the second to the last one, minimizing data duplication. The reason I think it's interesting is because we always promote backups, but trying to think about how many backups, how long you keep backups, in an effort to try to minimize data duplication. And then that really difficult task of thinking about data dependencies. You want to think about things that are connected to and dependent on other things in an effort to try to reduce, first of all, to visualize, conceptualize interconnections, and then how that could lead to potentially cascading failures. So here are some more specific methods / tools. We're starting to get almost into the tool category. Anonymization, pseudonymization, I always have a hard time saying that word, and tokenization. So anonymization removes all personal identifiers. I could go back to my professor experience. If I was doing research on human subjects, I might never collect the person's name. Or I might collect their name, but before anybody else saw it, I might give them a fake identifier, like participant 101, participant 102. And in fact, when I would apply for human subjects research approval, I would have to indicate the procedure I would take to do this. And then after I gave the pseudonym, what I would do to protect the document that told me that participant 101 is actually Frank Dark, right? To protect Frank. And a token is a different kind of, well, it doesn't really work with my analogy. I guess that's what I should say. So go over to the very last column and the last row. When you save your credit card for online payments, the company isn't storing your real credit card. They're using a token that links to your card within their system. So if the hacker is taking the token, it doesn't have reuse outside of the system that issued it, right? So these are all more specific methods and sometimes built into tools to reduce complexity, reduce time, reduce surface, all of which aim to realize the principle of data minimization. So let's talk briefly about data isolation and compartmentalization. And I'm actually going to start at the bottom here and not in the table. These are really close cousins. Isolation is like having two separate locked rooms, and there is no door between them. Right? You could get into each one through a hallway. So there's a door into each one. There's a way into each one, but that's the only door in and out. There is no door between the two locked rooms. So therefore, if one locked room is breached, the other one is safe. Whereas compartmentalization would say there are two locked rooms and there is some kind of door between them. It could have controlled access. It could have more than one door between them, but there's a way to get from this room to this room. So it's compartmentalized, but not completely isolated. Okay, so that's the basic concept. And we're going to talk, I think, on the next slide about how this is implemented. So I'll just give you a minute to read the other rows in the table. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. It's a subtle distinction, but an important one. So more specifically, things that you, I think, have learned about already. Let's connect these things to the concept, the principle of data isolation, the principle of data compartmentalization. So over on the left-hand side, network segmentation. We talked about that back in module 2, didn't we? Right, so it's segmenting a network so that you can isolate data. Sandboxing. I don't think that we've talked about this so far in the class, but it's the concept that you would run applications in controlled, isolated environments. So it's in software security. to prevent spread, to prevent breach. Virtual machines and containers also used to isolate applications, or it could be used to isolate processes or workloads. And then access control lists, we talked about that back in Module 2, can be used also for implementing the principle of data isolation. Compartmentalization, data classification. Are these data sensitive? Are they classified? Are they top secret? Understanding the value of the data and then compartmentalizing them according to that value. Least privilege access, access control lists. And you might see that I highlighted network segmentation because it's in both of these lists. And here we've got access control in both of these lists. I'll come back to that in just a minute. Architectures, structuring applications into independent modular services to prevent full system compromise. Zero trust architecture, continuously verifying identity and access rights at every level, right? So if you can't completely isolate, if the best that you can do is compartmentalize, you're going to trust nothing and you're going to verify it all the time before any action is permitted. So as I said, you can see that there are concepts in both. How can that be? So tools and methods, the entire purpose of that framework I gave you was to get you thinking about the fact that there's not a one-to-one relationship between a principle, a method, and a tool, right? So in this particular case, network segmentation can do both. It can both isolate and it can compartmentalize. What matters is what the security goals are and how it's implemented, right? So a tool is just a tool. What matters is what you're trying to accomplish and then how you use the tool to accomplish that. And I want you to always remember that. And I want to tie this back to what we talked about. We first introduced the concept of defense in depth, I think way back in Module 1. We really emphasized it in Module 3 when we asked you to prepare a defense in depth plan. And we're back revisiting it. We're trying to build on what we've already learned. So anytime you think about a principle and its affiliate methods, or you think about methods and all of the principles that a method might be able to realize, anytime you think about that, I want you to think about it in the context of defense in depth, right? So I want you to try to think about, how do methods implement principles? What principles am I trying to implement? What's the most effective and cost-efficient way to do that with the methods and the tools that are available to me? So that concludes this short lecture on data minimization and isolation and compartmentalization. And I'm going to direct you to go back to the Canvas course and to read just a little bit more about defense in depth and data security. Thank you.